Hey guys, you're tuning into the Legacy Men's Podcast, made by men, for men. Young or old, broken, or firm in your foundation. Join us every episode for testimonies from all walks of life. Just as iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. Enjoy the episode, men.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Legacy Men's Podcast here at the Depot at Cornerstone Church. My name is Gary Trevor, your host, and my co-host, Jason Gonzalez, and we are thrilled today to invite back Tim Means.
Hey guys, welcome to Legacy Men's Podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't watched the first Tim Means video, go ahead and go back to that, look that up, just so you can kind of get in tune with what we're discussing here today. And then also, don't forget to subscribe, share any of this content with some of your friends that may be needing this. And then as well as on Spotify, you can follow us there. Tim Means, thank you for joining us again here today. Pleasure to have you. Wanted to, just kind of revisit some of the things that we discussed in our first video, and as well as you didn't really go in a lot to just the surgery that you had. So I think that's kind of where we left off. So wanted to revisit some things. Gary, I know you wanted to ask some things, maybe just go back to his childhood.
Yeah, just so basically I want to go back to where you were at the church. You were dating your wife, and you went down to the church in South North Carolina.
Yeah, I was living
where the massacre happened?
Yeah, I was living there at the moment.
Okay.
I was living in Charleston, South Carolina when it happened. I would say not dating my wife. My wife and I were friends. We played by a little different, different rules. When I had met my wife, she had a pretty hard and fast rule that we were either friends or we were engaged. And it was a different type of relationship for myself. I can say that I had never been in a relationship where I had not had a sexual relationship with a partner up until my wife.
Okay.
We were not sexually intimate until we got married, and my friends were like, "What? No way! Like, how did you pull that off?" Because I was pretty wild. I think we discussed a lot of that in my last session. But I was looking for something different, and I think when we're picking really the most important component of our life, which is who our mate will be.
Correct.
The guidelines that we have set forth should be very stringent. I know I traveled for a living, for an example, and I've met so many men who there are trust issues, and I knew that if my wife wasn't going to have intimate moments with myself, that wasn't something I ever had to worry about happening with someone else. But there was just a lot of parameters around that. She was a wonderful Christian woman. She helped me getting back into the church and the growth journey that was happening for me at that moment. She actually coached track behind one of the individuals that was shot in the church shooting. So Goose Creek High School, she was a track coach there, the lady who was shot in the shooting, and my wife became coach there the following year, which I think was an amazing opportunity for her in growth and dealing with grief and trauma, as well as learning that life moves on in many ways, and things get forgotten. So she was able to set up some programs there at the school that was allowed that memory to maintain. I think we're dealing with the shootings right now, and many of us become numb to them, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's, you move on so quickly from one to the next that we've really become desensitized to violence as a nation.
I agree.
And I can say I've been there myself. It's like there's another one. And you look and you don't feel anything emotionally at this point. Sometimes you pretend you do, or you look on social media and you see people pontificating as if they're having some strong emotional response. But we have to ask, is that real? And how do we get to a point as men that we can feel again?
Correct.
Because many of us learned to shut down our feelings as young men because they didn't serve us well, or men that feel are weak. So how do I shut that down? When really our feelings are our superpower. And I think we, as men, need to learn to lean into our emotions and feelings again. I know we come from a generation who was very stoic, and then we've gone through this transition to, as men, it's a good thing for us to be emotional and in our feelings. But what you find is people are stuck in them.
Yeah.
So they learn to feel, but they didn't learn to process. And so how do we learn to feel again, but actually do the deep, hard work to learn to process our feelings and know that they are good for us? They're in service of us. God gave us emotions and feelings for a reason. They tell us a lot intellectually in what we should do and how we should respond and act. But we don't get that when we're numb.
Yeah.
And
The display of doing something that you talked about in Charleston was that those individuals were still forgiving, right? So those actions that happened with that shooting, you came in that moment and you saw that they were still giving grace to the individuals that were held accountable for that shooting.
Yeah, and even in that moment, there were so many people calling their forgiveness weakness. And I understood it. I understood why it may appear to be that. And I think we talked a bit about that on the last subject, that you know, within the racial demographics of the nation, there seems to be expectations for some to forgive a little more so than others, and that becomes a hostile topic in some degrees. But the power and strength that I saw in that forgiveness, really in the spiritual maturity, that you knew someone understood the power that they were keeping to themselves in their relationship with the Lord by not hanging on to that hatred, had nothing really to do with the other person. It had to do with, how do I maintain my dignity and move forward in my relationship with the Lord without this stain of bitterness and hatred eating at my heart.
Yeah. So that was a staple moment in your, you were married then, right? Now married about 6 years, correct?
I was not married at that time. Okay. My wife and I were friends. We became married shortly thereafter in Charleston.
Cool.
I lived there for about another year. The first year of marriage was rough. I didn't know if we were going to make it, to be honest. I had a lot of demons left in my closet, I think probably is the best way to explain it. You know, I said I was really just getting back into my faith and leaning into it. A lot of that had to do with her, but I was still very immature in my faith at that point in time, and I didn't act very responsibly. It's not to say that both people don't own some of anything that happens, but I believe as men, it's our responsibility to take full ownership. I think one of my favorite quotes is from John Wooden, and I don't know it exactly, but it essentially says that you've only failed once you start to place blame. Like, the moment that you place blame is the moment that you failed. And so I tried to take full responsibility for everything. So that year was rough, and for the most part, I own most of that. And then I was given the opportunity to move out here to Phoenix. And it was a promotion at my job. I was going from a district manager to a regional manager for the organization that I work for. And she had a year left on her contract. So I moved out here a year without my wife, and she had 3 beautiful daughters that I loved dearly when we were married. And so I spent a year by myself in isolation. And not that everybody should try that. It was in many ways the worst year of my life, but it was also in many ways one of the best. The growth that you can have when all you have is yourself and your intentions to grow, right? I don't think growth happens without an intention to grow. But when you're in isolation like that, there's a lot of time to really reflect. There's a lot of time to sit with the Word. There's a lot of time to go out and meet men that you can have discussion with. My wife had even said, you should go to a singles group. And I was like, I'm not going to a singles group. And she said, so why would I do that? And she was like, well, because married groups at church don't do things outside of the group. And she was like, single groups do. She was like, you can tell them you're married. She was like, but I want you to be around people.
Right.
So it was definitely an opportunity to be lonely. And I think sometimes we look at loneliness as a bad thing in today's society, but you can use loneliness very wisely if you choose.
And how did that come out? Like, as far as your pursuit of the relationship with the Lord, was it just through the Word? Did you find some groups that you were fond of, and then kind of grew spiritually before you and your wife met back up?
All of the above. So a lot of time to read. I love to read. I try to read a book a week. I've been doing that since I was 18, and I love to read the Word as well. So I had a lot of time to read.
Awesome.
I had the men's group here at Cornerstone, but I also had some really strong mentors in my life at that point in time that I was able to talk to on a regular basis. and some mentees. I think it's important to have both a mentor and a mentee in your life, because nothing holds you more accountable than knowing somebody's looking up to you and making sure that what your words are meet your actions. And mentors are very forgiving and coaching in that, but mentees are very important for us to have as well, because they're listening to us and they're watching and they're saying, like, are you living up to what you're teaching me?
Right.
So I think we all should have one of both of those. So I would say the combination of all of the above was good for me that year.
That's really cool.
So did you get that from Cornerstone? I mean, so you were here for a year by yourself. So at what point did you decide to get out and find a church that, as I always say, iron sharpens iron, like-minded people can grow better together versus isolation?
Immediately, I came to Cornerstone most often. I did definitely church shop. I went to multiple different
Never heard
churches,
that, church shop.
churches within the valley to see really what fit best for me. I'm not a big I wasn't a big worship guy at that point in time. I've turned into a big worship guy. I don't think I understood the power of worship at that point in time. Like, you look around church and men don't oftentimes worship, like they're kind of with their hands in their pockets, because sometimes we're too cool to worship, right? And so I intellectualized my relationship with the Lord. I was still doing that at that point in the time, where now I've grown more into loving my relationship with the Lord, and worship is very important. So I was really looking for great sermons at that point in time, more so than great worship, and really bouncing around to see where I might find that. And Cornerstone was definitely home once I landed there.
I'm looking at something that your grandmother instilled in you, was people believe intellectually, but they don't actually trust it.
Yeah, I talked a bit in the last session about my grandmother's surgery that had been botched, and her belief that people make mistakes. And, we
Excuse me.
We have multiple different cultural emergings in the United States, some coming from the Judeo-Christian values, some coming from Greek and Roman philosophies and teachings, which is very much intellectual, and that rational thought is God. And if you go back and study the time of Jesus, it really was that if you knew something intellectually but you didn't live it as a way of being, then you didn't actually know it. And I think I gave a Yoda quote last time that I was here to say that. But oftentimes we try to pour more knowledge into our heads, and we try to intellectually understand something, and we can say, I get it, but I'm not living it. So we search knowledge instead of wisdom.
Yeah.
And wisdom is really the embodiment of that knowledge. Sometimes it's better to just really know one thing and live it than it is to have knowledge of 100 different things.
Amen.
That you're not actually willing to apply.
Yeah, really cool. So take us back to the moment where you were flown to, I believe, San Diego, right, for your surgery. That we left out a lot of detail there. So I know there's some things that if you haven't been through this type of medical procedure, and there's not that many, if you could walk people through,
that'd be great.
Just on what happened, where you were at, and just walk us through that day, like where you woke up and then all of a sudden you were in a tough spot.
Yeah, I was in San Diego for a trial, and I had told my wife prior to going that I didn't feel well. The night before, we were at church on a Saturday night, the Saturday service, and I couldn't stand for the worship. And she was like, well, you're going to the emergency room when we leave here. And I told her, no, I'm not. Like, let's sleep on it, and I'll see how I feel in the morning. And I had known for months that something was going on. And to all you men out there listening, I think we do that often, is we listen to the fire alarms going off, and we don't respond to them within our own bodies. And sometimes it's because of our stress levels being so high that we constantly don't feel well. I can say for people that are drinking, it's hard to determine when your body's in a state that's needing attention, because it's in a constant state of repair. So being able to listen to your body at that point in time. But I wasn't. I knew the fire alarms were going off. I had flown to, I woke the next morning, and my wife woke me up to say, you're going to the urgent care right now. So she did at least give me that night. Went, they didn't find anything. Flew to San Diego to represent my company in a trial. And the second day I was there, I could go to the gym and work out, and it would force blood flow through my body, and I would feel pretty good. That day didn't work. I got back to the hotel, and I just couldn't get up. So I drove myself to the hospital in Coronado, went in, and they originally told me that they had found a tumor in my liver about the size of a golf ball. That was day one, which I was extremely nervous about. And liver cancer is something that often doesn't have a good outcome. But the second day they came in and they said, well, we don't think it's a tumor. They had gone from, and I don't remember the order, one was an MRI and one was a CAT scan, and then they got to the ultrasound. Once they did the second step, they were like, well, we don't think it's a tumor. There's something really weird happening, and your body has grown these new vessels around this blockage. We still think it's a tumor, but we don't know. And the third day they came in, and the liver doctor was there, and he did an ultrasound. He said it wasn't a tumor at all. It was a blood clot about the size of a golf ball, and they thought it had been there for about 7 years growing. It had been there so long that my body had started to grow veins around where the blockage was, apparently. I don't know much about medicine, so I don't know how all of that works, but he was trying to explain it to me. They were going to release me, and my wife just went nuts. And then, so the liver doctor came back in and was like, you can't release him. He'll be dead by the end of the week. Like, he can't go. So they moved me downtown to Sharp, downtown San Diego. They put a PICC line in my neck on Friday night. They were going to drop some type of medicine through that was going to break up this clot. And then in 24 to 48 hours, they were going to scrub it and get the clot out. Well, that happened. Sunday, I went into to surgery. They were going to remove it. And I remember when they laid me there, they said, oh, no, we forgot to secure the line. And so it had moved. And they did the surgery. They removed the clot. They put me back in ICU. And about, I guess it was about an hour later, my wife had noticed that I had just blood coming out of different orifices in my body. And they were like, oh, that's normal. They wiped them off. And so the girls were still back here in Phoenix. So she started driving back through the mountains. My mother was on the phone with my father, and they had called for every available unit of blood in the hospital. And so there's like somebody got shot or stabbed, something's going on. And my dad, who was back in Kentucky at the time, now mind you, when my mom flew out, we didn't know what was going on, and we definitely didn't think it was going to turn into this. So my father would have been there if we would have known, but he didn't. So, he was like, no, I think it's Tim. And so they rushed me back into surgery, cut me open from my chest down to my stomach, and I was just pouring blood. I went through over 28 units of blood, about 8.5, 9 hours into surgery. They had already told my wife and mother, he's not going to make it. They originally had cauterized a hole that they had poked in the side of my liver, but after that, they couldn't find what was going on. And it was in the blind, it was in the dark. They couldn't see anything. There was just so much blood pumping through.
This is when they had contacted your brother as well, right?
Yeah, they had contacted my brother. He flew out. He thought he was coming to get my body. Like, the full expectation was that I wasn't going to make it. And it just kind of just miraculous events kind of lined up perfectly, and we'll get to those, I'm sure, in just a second. But ultimately, he was able to find it. My portal vein had burst, which apparently there's a very small number of people who have ever survived that in history. And kind of the perfect storm for me. There's a curve in your portal vein. I guess for about 95% of the population, it's inside the liver. Mine's outside. And if it had been inside the liver, they would have never been able to fix it. That hospital that I got switched to was the only hospital in San Diego that had enough capacity in the blood machine that could pump fast enough to keep blood to my heart and brain. And so just this, if I would have been anywhere other than ICU when it happened, I would have bled out before I ever got to the hospital. And all of those are why the survival of this is so small. But the doctor had come in after I made it. He was a much older gentleman, said he'd been doing trauma surgery for about 30 years. And he said, son, I'm not a believer. And he said, I've never used the word miracle, but you're my first miracle. And I've had plenty of doctors tell me that since then, and they always say something along the lines of, you're not supposed to be here, right? Which kind of rubs me a little wrong, because I'm always like, well, I am here, or they'll say count your lucky stars, or something along those lines. It's rare that I run into someone of faith in the medical industry. I'm sure there are tons, but oftentimes, or maybe they're just cautious of the way they say it because they don't know what my faith may be.
Through your like consciousness, right? Because I'm sure it was all blur. But you talked about something about like hearing prayers throughout that experience. So can you walk us through that? Like what it might have been inside of, maybe some of the word that you had read that was being divulged by your brain and processing and or your family? Yeah,
I mean, it was specific voices. People ask me what I remember from it, and it's not much. I remember getting wheeled in, and then I remember waking up on a ventilator. a couple of days later or a day later, whatever that might have been, and strapped down to the bed. Apparently, I was quite the fighter, so they had me strapped all the way down to the bed. But while I was unconscious during the surgery, the only thing I remember, there was no white light or anything like that. Just remembered hearing prayer in multiple different voices, praying directly for me. So it was definitely an eye-opening experience, and to know my mother was on the other side of the glass. I think she was in contact with my aunt and my father and other people. So I knew some of these people that were aware of what was happening, and I knew they were genuinely prayer warriors, right? Because we live in the days of thoughts and prayers where everybody types it in,
right.
And you have to wonder, like, how many people are really praying when they say thoughts and prayers? And that's not a judgment. It's just I wonder how many times there's actually a physical act of prayer. Attached to that. But I knew these people were. And so I can't say for sure that it was their voices that I heard, but I knew for sure they were praying. And I know that's what I heard.
One of the important parts was, as we come to a close, because we've covered so much information, we want to get you back for a third time as well, obviously so much information, but your body was shut down, basically, for, a period of 2 months before they could actually revitalize the whole body, so your brain and heart were functioning, but the rest was shut down. So that's another additional miracle God that provided you.
Yeah, it was funny. My doctor that once I got out of ICU was so amazing. They weren't going to release me. They told me I would be in the hospital for at least 6 weeks. I got out a week and a day. But I was pretty headstrong. The first day that I woke up, they had asked me to try to sit for 30 minutes. And next thing you know, my wife's just beating on the window. And she's like, lay him down, lay him down. And apparently I turned ashen white because my wife told them, like, you all don't know him. He will sit here until he passes out. Like, if you challenge him and say, try to sit for 30 minutes, he's going to try to go 2 hours. So they told me I wouldn't walk for a week. I'm walking holding the walker because they told me I couldn't walk without it. But I was like, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to walk with it. So, so I was out in a week and a day after the surgery, which they had told me 6 weeks to get out. The doctor that I had, she was such a beautiful lady. I don't know if you've ever had anybody full-on cheer when you have a bowel movement, but she was so excited that my colon had begun to work again, or my bowels had begun to work. But there was a lot of things that didn't when I got out. For example, my kidneys didn't work. I had a friend that was already offering a kidney to give a kidney transplant. And I was doing blood work on a weekly basis. They were trying to figure out why this had happened. And my kidneys just started and returned to full function.
Within a week and a day?
Well, it was not within a week and a day. This was about 2 months after I had been out of the hospital. My kidneys still weren't functioning, and they couldn't figure out, what, they didn't know what would return, because all of my organs, other than really my brain and heart, had gone this amount of time without blood. So everything had gone into full-on shock and trauma. And some things just weren't recovering, and some things still aren't normal to this day, and they just won't ever be normal again, which I'm fine with. It's nothing that, every day's a blessing. So, every day's a blessing. But yeah, my kidneys were the one that was just really strange because they weren't functioning, and I had gone back in to get the results, and they were like, we're not going to have to get you a transplant. They're perfectly fine now. And we didn't know how. There were so many things throughout this journey that the doctors just continued to explain to me that we don't have a medical understanding of what's happening here.
Thank God for prayer. Thank God for prayer.
So Tim Means makes a lot of other impacts just for our listeners, just within just a leadership class that he runs here at Cornerstone for Men. And I wanted to highlight at this point that you really have to be intentional when you're walking with Christ. And you came into my life haphazard, like just not something we could ever plan. So I ran into Tim at my gym. I had noticed his face at Cornerstone, and then in passing, I saw you mentoring some individuals that I've come in contact with as well. And then when I saw you at the gym, it was just kind of like a fist bump, like, "Hey, what's up, man? What's up? Like, how you doing? Awesome. Like you like fitness, I like fitness." And this guy works harder than anybody else at the gym. Just so you guys know, like he is a beast, and so. I never would have thought that you were going through anything in regards to your health and fighting back. But I looked up to you, right, from afar, just kind of like, man, that guy really grinds. It's awesome, and he's a mentor at church and all that stuff. So I just wanted to say, be intentional. If you have men in your life, we say what's up to each other a lot. We fist bump. We do all that stuff. We pat each other on the back. And that's cool and all. I value people that have that many contacts, but jump in, dive deep into some of your relationships. If you
Amen.
know of men that you look up to, tell them.
Yep.
I stopped Tim at during one of his reps, and I was like, hey man, like I just wanted to say, I see you at church, I see you grinding. I look up to you, man. Like you're awesome. You're a huge impact in my life. It motivates
Amen.
me to get up in the morning and get my butt to the gym. And he's like, yeah, man. And he's like, after this surgery. And I was like, hold up. Wait, what surgery? And he was talking about, his liver surgery and everything, and that he almost died. And then it just motivated me even that much more to get my butt in the gym. No
Amen.
excuses. So find those men in your life.
Yes.
We oftentimes we're just the alpha, which is something that we discussed as well. Be the omega too. Ask somebody what's up, how they're doing, invite them out to coffee, and get to know each other.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us here at the Legacy Men's Podcast. Tim Means, thank you so much for joining us again. You're also living a godly legacy, so we appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out there on Spotify. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your life.
Thank you.
Next time on the Legacy Men's Podcast.
What kind of legacy do you want to lay down here as men? What kind of legacy for your children? What kind of legacy for your wife in your church, for the kingdom? And I think that's a message that we all can benefit from. And so we kind of walk beside them in that. Is like, it's no different. Like, we have some of the same struggles.